Welcome everybody to the Dot Video Show with Jesse Miller. Welcome to our studio audience. Thank you guys for coming out here. Really appreciate it. Welcome to our millions and billions of internet viewers. Tonight's millions and billions of internet viewers include our friends Cliff at the Discovery Channel, Mr. Phil Burrows. Thank you guys for making it out here. Thank you for joining us in the chat room. Man, do we have an awesome show for you today. We've got the brand new Sony Touch Anycast. This is a multimedia switcher that we're going to spend a little time discussing because it's really cool. We've got Sony's new camera, the PMW 400. It feels like the ENG guys have been left out, but finally, Sony's coming around. They've given us a nice shoulder-mounted 2/3 inch camera that's great for ENG or multi-camera work with fiber or triax. Very awesome. But of course, the reason everybody's tuned in tonight is to see the Odyssey7Q. The Odyssey7Q is totally awesome. We're going to give you a brief introduction to it, and then our friend Dan Keaton from Convergent Design is going to correct any mistakes I happen to make and highlight some of the finer points of this awesome piece of equipment. All right, please join me over here, studio right. We are going to show off the big, bad 7.7 inch OLED monitor that also records, known as the Odyssey7Q. All right, so as I mentioned, 7.7 inch OLED monitor. That alone is worth the price of admission. It's $22.95, there you are, $2,300 to get your hands on one of these devices. Now the Odyssey7Q is awesome because you can purchase it and get all of the built-in features without having to pay for the sort of additional features. Some of you guys are shooting on Arri. Some of you guys are shooting on Canon 5D with its, the Canon C500 with its 4K output. Some of you guys are shooting on F55s. Some of you guys are shooting on the FS700. Each one of those has a different RAW format, and it's pretty expensive to get a device that records the RAW format of all these individual cameras. What isn't expensive is to get yourself an Odyssey7Q and pay only for the RAW codecs that you want. This is super cool. So for instance, $22.95 for an Odyssey7Q if you've got yourself an FS700 with the 3G SDI output upgrade. That's just a $500 upgrade from our friends at Sony, and of course Midtown Video can help you through that transition. So send your cameras to us. We'll get them up to Sony. They'll come back, and instead of having a regular SDI output, it'll have a 3G SDI output, which allows it to communicate with the Odyssey7Q. All right, now to highlight what I mean, to delineate the difference between just outlaying the $2,300 for the built-in features versus paying a little bit more for the RAW features, check this out. Built-in features, record 1920 by 1080 to your Odyssey7Q, no problem. It's got dual SSD capacity, so eventually, not right away, but eventually once this feature's unlocked, you'll be able to do 1920 by 1080, one stream on this SDI SSD, and one stream on this SSD, so you're doing an instantaneous backup of your HD recording. But if you wanted to go further, if you did get your 3G SDI upgrade on your camera and you can output RAW, now you can spend another $795 and get the Sony RAW codec. So now you can record 2K at up to 240 frames per second or 4K at up to 60 frames per second right out of your Sony NEX FS700. So dual 512 SSD cards, that's going to give you 20 minutes of 240 frames per second recording. Now you might be saying to me, Jesse, 20 minutes, that's not a very long time, but keep in mind, if you're going to play this stuff back at 24 frames per second, there is a 10-to-1 ratio for your slow motion footage. So 20 minutes becomes 200 minutes of watching. You're going to be shooting this slow motion stuff in short bursts, so trust me, when I say 2 512 gig cards gives you 20 minutes, that's like a lifetime of slow motion recording. A 512 gig SSD card is $795. They also come in 256 gigs, so it's on the order of $500 or something like this for the 256 gig SSD drives. So point being, SSD drives, 7.7 inch OLED monitor equals totally awesome. So I'd like to give you guys a brief look at what it's like to go from your regular 700 recording to push it into RAW mode. So the question is, if you're shooting on a Sony FS100 and not a 700, okay, and you're limited to HDMI connection, not BNC connection, how will it handle pull down? That's a great question. One thing that I should note are the inputs on the Odyssey7Q. You've got 4 HD SDI inputs, Okay, you've got a BNC input separate for your LTC timecode, but you've also got an HDMI input. Now it is a mini connector, so you'll need your standard regular HDMI to a HDMI mini connector, but how will it handle pull down? Expertly. You're familiar with the Nano Flash, you're familiar with the Gemini, all of the Convergent Design suite of products will take your 24p in, and if you want it recorded in 60i, you can do it. All right, so here we are back on camera 4. What you're looking at is the output of my NEX FS700. All right, but this, as you can see in the top left-hand corner, is set to 1080 60i. Now that is not 2K, that is not 4K, that is not RAW, that's just your run-of-the-mill stuff. But this camera happens to be serviced by our friends at Sony. Dom Isola rushed this through to get it done in time for the Dot Video Show. We really appreciate that, Dom. So I'm going to jump into our record settings, and you'll notice that it gives me the option to go RAW, HD, or SD. Yes, you can still record in standard definition if you were so inclined. We're executing our RAW, beautiful. So we're going to power up our Odyssey7Q. It's a Neutrik connection. Comes with an AC cable. There are, of course, little batteries available, and as Dan Keaton promised me, he's going to give us Neutrik to Anton Bauer 2-pin connectors, all the kinds of input and output connectors that you might need for your camera. It's going to happen. So let's see now. We've got RAW coming out, so you may want to switch camera 4 to 24p. Brilliant. Okay, so now I'm feeding a 2K RAW signal to my Odyssey7Q. And I'm glad you asked the pull-down question. You'll notice that we happen to be feeding back to our switcher in homeroom a 1920 by 1080 signal. 1920 by 1080 24. This show happens to be brought to you on the TriCaster, which is why all of our cameras out there in 1080 60 land are going to play well with this 24p HD output from the 7Q. So cut to 4 just for a second to show them I'm not lying. Look at that, all right? So this is a live camera, that's my hand. Not very well in focus, but the point being, we're really throwing a lot of gear at you today. Let's see a camera. Beautiful. Okay, so what I've done, I've changed my NEX FS700, which has been updated to have a 3G SDI output. Okay, that means I've got RAW output. I can send 4K RAW and I can send 2K RAW out to my Odyssey7Q recorder. Of course, I had to purchase the Sony RAW option, $795. You enter a key into your Odyssey7Q recorder, and then all of a sudden, bam, you can input your 4K or your 2K RAW stuff. So, so then you may want to shoot some 240 frame per second slow motion. So let's see how we do this. All right, let's jump back into 4. I wonder if you can see this. The Sony L series battery is what's powering my NEX FS700. Goes all the way back to the Z1U, probably goes all the way back to the PD150. So if you still have 1991 batteries that are L series, that are working, you can power up this camera. And as promised by our friends at Convergent Design, there will be L series and Canon BP series battery adapters to power your Odyssey7Q. Great question, I'm glad you guys asked that. All right, so take a look behind me at this 7.7-inch OLED monitor. I mean, this is a gorgeous monitor. Let's see it on camera 1. Beautiful. Okay, so I mentioned already that we're looking at a 2K RAW output from the 700. This is a touch screen interface. So if I wanted to say, bring up my badass histograms, there it is. So I'm using a stylus, but of course I could be using my finger. If I just touch the button, it shall appear or disappear. If I sort of hold my finger on it for a little longer, that's what brings up the settings. So check out this waveform monitor. You've got your RGB parade, but if you wanted to, you could change it to just be a Luma waveform monitor, or just a reds, or just the greens, or just the blues, right? We can take it off of full screen, so it's just down in the corner here. I like it on full screen. So I'm going to give us back into RGB parade. One thing that you want to note about this waveform monitor is that when we're in 2K or when we're in 4K RAW, there are sort of two different things going on. There's the raw recording, and then maybe you're using a lookup table. Maybe you're using a LUT to sort of color up what the image looks like so your director on the set doesn't say, oh my God, everything looks milky and flat. So you might sort of program a LUT into your monitor or into your camera. When I've got raw video coming into my Odyssey7Q, I do have the option of whether my waveform monitor is responding to the lookup table version of the image or to the native version of the image. So if I've got S-Log coming in or some kind of raw video coming in, I can do waveform monitors both on the raw image and on, let's say I'm using a Rec 709 lookup table, I can check out how the Rec 709 will look in my waveform monitor. And Mr. Keaton will expand a little bit on that for us later in the show. So let's get rid of this waveform monitor. Something else I'd like to show you are some of the awesome focus features. All right, so we're going to jump into focus here. And you'll notice that I've got 3 options. I've got edge only, edge in video, and edge enhanced. So as I kind of crank through my, my focus range, you'll notice, so TV over here is outlined in red. So as I rack through my focus, different parts of the J-Town logo are going to be in focus, right? Now, when I do have, if I don't want to be confused by what's in focus and what's out of focus, I can take away the video so that I'm only showing what is in focus. So the .tv edges of the logo are in focus, nothing else is, so only the .tv shows up. So here's a full screen look at it. That is just the edge only version. So if I jump into my options and I go to edge enhanced, this is a little bit better of a look. So we're not confused by any colors. We're only highlighting red on the edges of what is definitely in focus. This is a pretty nifty tool. Now, if I wanted to see the video and the edges, that's no problem. That's just another option in my Focus Assist options. So pretty cool. Let's go back to one to sort of highlight what's going on with option-wise. There we are. So these 3 options in the corner. This is edge in video. What you're used to is just sort of regular peaking. Edge only, where only the items that are in focus show up, like the .tv. Or edge enhanced, where you see stuff that's almost in focus, and red, where it's definitely locked on in focus. So really cool Focus Assist options here. You've got a 2:1 zoom, right? You've got a 1:1 pixel for pixel. You got a 1:1 pixel to pixel ratio situation going on in here. A lot of awesome features for helping you monitor. But as I said before, what we really want to see is how do you get 240 frames per second slow motion footage out of the camera. Now, you're used to using an SD card inside this camera, right? And of course, you can record 240 frames per second at like an 8-second burst. But when you hit record, and then you stop recording, the camera takes a deep breath. They're like, let me think about that. Let me process that image for you. And then you won't be able to record slow motion again until the camera is done processing. Well, the Odyssey7Q takes all that processing out of the camera, does it in its high capacity processor, so that when I hit this record button, I do need the SSDs. You're absolutely right. All right, so let's pop our SSD drives into the recorder. And of course, we've got it set up. When I tell the Odyssey7Q that I'm recording from my FS700, it knows to take a record trigger from the FS700's SDI output. So check this out. No SDHC card in the camera. No SDHC card in the camera. Yet, when I hit the record button on my camera, it triggers the record on the Odyssey7Q. You see how that red lit up? We are recording now, which is pretty sweet. So often my guys ask me, hey, Jesse, is there some way that I can trigger the record into the Odyssey7Q directly from the camera? Absolutely. So much so that you don't even need an SDHC card inside the camera to get this done. So I'm going to go back into play. I'm going to play my last clip. This is a little bit of some water pouring that's fun to do in slow motion. So we're playing this back. This obviously took place over less than about 5 seconds, and yet because we did it at 240 frames and we're playing back at 24, it's going to be 50 seconds. You've got a 10:1 ratio of slow motion. I can jump into my playlist, and they're all available for playback, most of them in 240 frames per second. So that's our brief look at the Odyssey7Q. Before we go to the question, well, all right, let's take the question coming in from the internet.
When will ProRes be added?
So that's a great question. The question was, when will Apple ProRes's compressed codec be added? And so the answer is unofficially very soon. Officially, we're not allowed to use words like ProRes because somebody owns them. You know, Apple owns the name and the rights to that. We're definitely in negotiations with Apple to get their compressed codec as one of the standard features on here. Right now we're stuck with DNX HD, which is fine for all of our Avid operators, but what I understand is in the near future, ProRes will be a not just standard feature, but a free upgrade for existing Odyssey7Q owners. I'm getting an affirmative from the man. So before we go any further, before I make any further mistakes, let's bring up somebody who knows even more than I do about the Odyssey7Q. Please welcome from Convergent Design, Mr. Dan Keaton.
Hi.